Thanks, Rob, for the introduction. Yes, I am Brad Casemore, and I'm VP of Research for Data Center Networks at IDC. First of all, most of you, I think, are familiar with IDC. We do quantitative and qualitative research on IT and IT infrastructure markets, wide range of markets, and my coverage area is data center networking. Now, data center networking, in terms of my purview, includes all the software and hardware network infrastructure that resides in a data center, regardless of whether that's an on-premises enterprise data center, a cloud data center, or a service provider data center. I've been in the industry for a great many years, maybe a little more than I care to admit. Go all the way back to Token Ring. Some of you may remember that. But one thing I will say is that through that time, I've seen two significant periods of profound transition in the industry. One was the original rise of client-server, supplanting mini computers and mainframes and the networking capabilities that were required to support that. And the other one is what's happening now as a result of cloud disruption, cloud and multi-cloud. And I'm going to take you through that today. The agenda, in terms of the broad agenda, is, first of all, we're going to talk about specifically cloud's impact on data center networking, and most notably, for you folks in the room, we're going to look at application delivery infrastructure, ADCs, and how they're being changed by this. Then I'll look at how multi-cloud is contributing and accelerating those changes and having a significant effect as well. And then, as another element that's compounding the challenges and certainly expediting the change, we'll look at how cloud-native environments and microservices are further transforming the application delivery landscape and the requirements that are associated with the technology. And we'll take a look at how DevOps is playing a role in this change too, in terms of the interaction between DevOps and NetOps, and the requirements associated with the technology and how operational processes are changing. And I'll summarize at the end and try to make sense of it all and give you some guidance on where we think it's all going. So in terms of cloud and its impact, its profound impact on data center networks, one of the changes is, of course, a value migration from hardware to software. Hardware's still there in data center networks. I can certainly attest to that. But what's happening is that much of the hardware is becoming standardized at the data plane. Not all of it, but much of it. And there's an understanding that going forward, and certainly in the present, software is going to provide a much bigger role and deliver greater value in that context. We also see the application migration to clouds, and I think we all see that today, in terms of more applications, newer applications certainly, as well as some refactored applications moving to public clouds. And as a result of all this, it's less about speeds and feeds, which were a defining and differentiating characteristic in the past, and more about how the network, increasingly now in the form of software, supports applications and business outcomes. And then the changes, certainly, I think, are being felt most profoundly higher up the stack, where you see things like ADCs and application delivery infrastructure. That makes perfect sense because they're closest to the application. And then if I think about all the areas within DCN, and there are a great many of them, you can see it up on the slide, they're all being affected in one way or another. Profoundly in terms of their market shares, market growth, new technologies that are making their way into the markets, they're all feeling it. And we're going to go over why that's happening here now. This is lots of data, right? It's an IDC presentation. This is the application delivery market revenue by form factor. And this tells a story all on its own, right? You can see at the far side with 2015, it was primarily a hardware-defined market in terms of revenue. That ADC appliance, that's a physical appliance. Then you can see the virtual ADC and software ADC gaining share through the 2023 forecast period that we have up here. But increasingly, growth will also come from what we call ADC as a service, which is really application delivery provided in a cloud context, right, as a cloud-born service. There's going to be a lot of growth there. And this is all a reflection, of course, of the application landscape. This shift has begun, and we'll definitely see it accelerate over the next few years. And you saw the forecast slide there. And it's being transformed, again, by forces of DX, right, digital transformation. You've all heard about it. It's an imperative worldwide because many organizations are facing not only competition from their digitizing traditional adversaries in the marketplace and competitors, but from digital upstarts. We see that in a number of industries, right? And this is really happening across the vertical landscape. And then there's cloud, of course. Cloud is a means of realizing digital transformation. It's a mechanism to get there. Multi-cloud, in terms of being able to avail yourself of the right cloud for the application that you have in mind. And then cloud-native technologies, microservices, and DevOps. These are all coming together to basically produce some significant changes in the ADC market. As a result, the traditional hardware-defined ADC is really being superseded by something that is going to become increasingly composable and modular and software-defined, these application delivery services. And this is all, of course, going to occur increasingly at the application layer, what I call layer 7. And it needs to be orchestrated and managed across infrastructure, different types of infrastructure, across multiple clusters, and increasingly across multiple clouds. No question it is a multi-cloud world. And I think one thing that is important to stress, I mentioned applications before, the primacy of the application today in this multi-cloud context. Applications are not as they were primarily in the past, back-end systems of record, but they're increasingly systems of engagement. They become more relevant and certainly more impactful to the business. They're about generating revenue. They're about expediting business outcomes. They're about enhancing customer engagement and intimacy with the customer, involvement with the customer. And increasingly, they are driving competitive differentiation in these vertical markets that I mentioned earlier that are being challenged by not only traditional competitive factors, but also digital upstarts. Applications in this world are becoming inherently distributed because you will still have, in many cases, of course, your legacy applications, your monolithic apps that may not move. Certainly in the insurance industry, I still see applications that still run on AS400s. What this means, though, is redefining the data center and the data center network. This distributed nature makes it complex to manage and operate. You've got to deal with on-premises apps. You've got to deal sometimes with co-location facilities. Think about the interconnection-oriented architectures of folks like Equinix. There's a lot at play here. And you've got to deal with the public clouds. If we look at multi-cloud deployment plans, and this is specifically from a survey that we do on an annual basis called CloudView. This one was done in May of last year. There's a new one that's coming out shortly, but this was May of last year. We asked respondents, and you can see there were almost 6,000 worldwide, 5,740, to describe their organization's current or near-term plans for cloud deployment options. And you can see even then, right, these were plans, right? So somewhat aspirational, doesn't mean it's fulfilled. But there was already then a very strong inclination to adopt multi-cloud. And you can see as they rolled this forward 12 months, they were asked to kind of project. That becomes even more the case. As they think about managing these multi-cloud environments, and this is a question about from a different survey done this year. It's IDC's multi-cloud management survey done in the spring, or published in the spring. We asked them, when making a business case for multi-cloud management tools, what are the top 2 business outcomes you expect to achieve? And you can see very much aligned with probably your own expectations here. Speed and time to value metrics, operational agility, which is, of course, highly prized in the context of DX and cloud. Stability and availability metrics, which is highly relevant to application delivery, and improved customer experiences. Those were the top ones, and that all makes sense. Now, there are challenges as they have these aspirations about what multi-cloud should deliver in terms of business outcomes and value. There are significant challenges, and this was a question from that same survey. What are the most pressing operational results from your multi-cloud strategy, or operational challenges resulting from your multi-cloud strategy? And you can see that there are a number that are above 45%, including at the top at 54%, optimizing IT staff and processes. This is a big challenge, and we'll touch on this in a different context later. And then ensuring adequate IT staff talent and skills availability. This skills gap that they feel is in play here, and that's certainly true. We see it certainly in the network realm as you deal with automation, as you deal with more self-service capabilities, as you deal with greater programmability. This sort of skills gap is at play throughout the IT landscape. Then finding consistent security, access control, and compliance. We definitely see security come up again and again and again as a primary concern, and that makes sense when you consider the complexity of the more distributed landscape that we're moving into. And then optimizing cloud infrastructure spend, and certainly relevant to what we're talking about today, app performance and availability. It's not just multi-cloud, though, as I said at the outset in my agenda notes. It's also cloud native. So it's not just a question of where you'll place your applications in this new distributed environment where you're dealing with hybrid IT and you're dealing with multi-cloud, but how they'll be developed, how they'll be deployed and managed. So on that note, certainly as we look at microservices and we think about container orchestration in the form of Kubernetes, we've asked in a container survey, 86% of respondents believe containers in Kubernetes will have moderate or significant impact on multi-cloud management requirements. And what we also found was that the more experienced users are more likely to expect significant impacts. Though the top areas of those impact include, there it is again, the security related to change management and compliance. Again, security pervasively called out in any sort of IDC survey, whether it relates to the future of network infrastructure, whether it refers to other areas of IT infrastructure and IT management. It's a foremost concern. There's cloud cost management, makes sense. Increased demand for migrating applications across clouds, particularly among more mature Kubernetes users, and this is understandable, right? You're looking for that sort of portability, ideally, in these environments. And then that sort of heterogeneity that I kind of touched on earlier in the presentation, the need to manage VMs and containers together in these mixed environments. Certainly significant implications for application delivery infrastructure, and I'll touch on that later. The majority of enterprises, though, are still in the early stages of their adoption of containers and Kubernetes. And you can see here the numbers. It's early days for most folks. They're still figuring it out. The adoption curve has just begun. However, as we see on the next slide here, 45% of large US enterprises believe over half of production applications will leverage containers by 2023. So, it may be early, but the ramp is expected to be quite aggressive. Now, again, coming back to that multi-cloud context, and this is where we see a dovetailing or certainly an interrelationship again. To what extent, we asked them to what extent they expect adoption of containers and Kubernetes-based workloads to change multi-cloud management requirements. And there was a split between moderate and significant, but there were very few who felt there would be little to no change. So there is an anticipation that this, again, will drive further change and a need for new requirements. For application delivery, it's not just, as I said, the environments and where you place applications and the rise of microservices and cloud native, there are operational impacts that are related to that and certainly ramified by it. I think application delivery infrastructure will have to become, it has to serve the needs of multiple constituencies, and primarily, more and more, it's about the application, and it's that interaction with developers and DevOps that will be key. And everybody is struggling in this context to find the right collaborative model that, we hear a lot about separation of concerns, but what folks, I think, really need to figure out is how you get a reconciliation of interest, right? So the separation of concerns kind of, it suggests separateness. And what we really need to do in this whole context is come together to be able to arrive at the business outcomes that matter most. And that's exactly what that next point is, right? The infrastructure and operational processes must be aligned to support these business objectives and the business outcomes that are critical. If you look at a pyramid, right, you have the imperative being DX, cloud and multi-cloud as a means of realizing that and expediting it, right, accelerating toward that. And then you've got all the implications for infrastructure that kind of flow down at the base of the pyramid. It's all about the applications today, as I said, and certainly part of that is the changing nature of the applications, the fact that they are front of the house as well as back of the house. And in the context of DX, that's increasingly the means of how you do business, whether you're doing it as a web service, whether you're doing it out at the branch, regardless of where you're doing it. That's the nature of the app these days. We said we'd touch on DevOps too, and this is from a survey that we did, a PassView survey. Primarily large enterprises were respondents, just to give you a feel for the context in terms of interpreting this data, right, sussing it out. And we asked what percentage of your organization's applications under development are utilizing DevOps practices in each of the following timeframes. So you can see 2018, you can see 2020, and you can see 2021, and you can certainly see the trend, right, where it's going. Now, this is from a different survey, and I want to, first of all, tell you a bit about the respondent base for it, because I don't want you to be confused or alarmed at the data represented here. This survey, which was a DevOps survey, which was done last July, was large or very large organizations that are already have already adopted DevOps or plan to do so. Overwhelmingly skewed toward those who have already adopted it in some form, with a smaller percentage who plan to adopt it. So please understand the data in that context. This was not all large enterprises, including those who aren't yet aggressively on this journey. This was specifically skewed to large and very large groups who are already doing DevOps in some form. And you can see we asked them, which statement best describes your organization's collaboration related to DevOps? And you can see that team collaboration is encouraged, 31%, with basic collaboration tool investments. You see that's above 30%. Almost the same percentage have highly collaborative teams in place using collaboration tools that influence the cross-team operations. And then you can see the others. DevOps teams already take ownership of the dev, testing, deployment, and maintenance. And we created business DevOps teams, including business stakeholder accountability. That's the lowest percentage. So DevOps team collaboration is rated as high by these respondents. Most have made investments in collaboration-based tools, but there's still work to be done, even in these DevOps-oriented organizations, to get better aligned with business stakeholders. Now, same survey, we asked them a question about what statement best describes their organization's approach to automation in this DevOps context. And automate everything is pretty popular, right? I mean, I think that's something that I'll touch on toward the end as it relates specifically to network infrastructure and application delivery controllers and what they're morphing into. But this is clearly a priority in any sort of DevOps environment. And then there's the need for self-service infrastructure and provisioning. Certainly makes sense. if you're looking at aligning with the interest of the developer and the application, being able to use automation and self-service capabilities to provision what's needed when it's needed. Then organizations are choosing to use standard configuration management software over some cloud-based solutions. There's a substantial opportunity here for automation vendors. The need is high for automation solutions to work with clouds of choice, and that's certainly, you can see that in the multi-cloud response. There's some work to be done there from the respondent's perspective. There is support, and this is again the DevOps survey. What top features do you look for when you're investing in automation solutions for your DevOps initiatives? And multiple choice, they could choose more than one, right? And that's why the percentages are so high. Support for containers, certainly table stakes. The ability to continuously scale, so you think about auto-scaling functionality for these folks is called out. The ability to keep up with application code releases, proactive configuration, risk assessment and remediation, right? Being able, I kind of view that as the old networking hat on, troubleshooting and remediation. And then being able to benefit from open source and community support. That's also very important in this context. And there is coexistence with legacy platforms, of course, is very important. And that's something we touched on earlier, and I'll touch on once more before the end. In terms of barriers, things that need to be overcome, and the most urgent thing that they're looking to do in this context, there's the training, and there's the reskilling in new methods and tools. This is something that came up at the outset in this presentation, and again, you hear it called out here, specifically in a DevOps context. There's to have development operations in one organization. Very specific and prominent priority. And then you can see down the line, there's a number of things that they want to do. The things that are lacking, first I'll touch quickly on machine learning. I think what's important about machine learning and AI is not machine learning and AI, certainly in my context, if I think about it from an operational perspective, and certainly we're already seeing this in use up and down the stack in networking. What I think is most important of it is what it can help you achieve, the outcomes it can help enable, right? So what are some of those outcomes? Well, it can help with intelligent automation, right? It can help with visibility, pervasive visibility, real-time visibility into your environment, creating a closed loop between your declarative intent and the ongoing, and maintaining that declarative intent as change occurs. And it can help certainly with troubleshooting and remediation so that increasingly the network full stack can become more automated in its intelligence to respond to changing conditions, become self-healing, that sort of thing. A lot of work to be done there, but that's I think why that technology is important. And then finally, you can see that there's an issue here. It's called out in two different respects. Convincing senior management to push DevOps at a more strategic level. And then there's convincing senior management to allocate more to DevOps budgets. So there's work to be done on that front. So what does this mean for application delivery infrastructure? All of these things I discussed, what does it mean? Well, it is all about the application, as I said earlier. There's a shift from hardware-based and defined technologies and products to software-driven and defined. What we're going to see is abstracted management control planes, and they're going to be separated, decoupled, as in SDN. We've seen that in SDN. It'll have to be a more declarative policy. It will have to be more intelligent, right? Intent-based policy, but more intelligent. A lot of talk about intent-based networking, but I kind of see that, again, as more of a mechanism. What are we really trying to achieve? The intent is a mechanism. What we're trying to achieve is a smarter network. We'll need comprehensive automation for infrastructure agility, where you have policy as the king, and then you have pervasive visibility that informs that policy, that helps to remediate problems on the network. We'll have elastic scale and flexibility. We'll need that. We'll also need self-service provisioning. We'll have to function seamlessly through orchestration across those multi-cluster and multi-cloud landscapes that I mentioned earlier, because the data center is no longer a fixed entity that sits on premises, right, in this cloud world. You still have that, but it now extends. It extends out to co-location facilities, it extends out to interconnection facilities, it extends out to public clouds, and you have SaaS apps in there too. You have a lot going on, and the network, broadly speaking, certainly in a data center context, has to be able to extend and expand in order to accommodate that. That's why you've seen the extension of policy-based SDN out to public clouds. And you're certainly seeing that in application delivery as well. You've got to be able to support all form factors, whether that's VMs, bare metal, containers, cloud, and types of applications, monolithic and microservices. And you got to turn, as I said earlier, that separation of concerns into reconciliation of interest, get everybody rowing in the same direction. And of course, security, always a priority. And one thing I will say there is, as the data center has expanded and as the network has expanded, what we're finding is the network is being used. Network, when I say network, of course, I mean both hardware and software infrastructure, primarily the software piece. You think about things like microsegmentation and segmentation. The network is being used more because it goes everywhere as a means of detection and enforcement. And again, that policy becomes key. If I think about this in the big picture, and this is the theme I just want to expand on a little more here, I think the goal of application delivery infrastructure, the part which is the part of the network that is closest to the application and is critical to assured application delivery, is to achieve operational simplicity because of the skills gap, right? And because of the complexity of these environments. It's sort of the opposite of what networking was about in the last era, where you added lots of nerd knobs and dials and proprietary protocols and hacks. Everybody was a MacGyver in a way, and there was a lot of complexity. But now there's a real need for simplicity because this is complex, right? It's hard to do, and you've got to have greater operational efficiency. You've got to be able to scale your environment and be more responsive to the needs of DevOps and developers and the business objectives. And you need to increase the agility through intelligent automation. The long-term goal in all this is not necessarily an intent-based network, but it's an intelligent network. It's a network that is basically autonomous, or as autonomous as it can be. And whether you want to call that self-driving, whether you want to call that autonomous network infrastructure, that's where we need to go. And we need to go there all the way through the stack, including application delivery infrastructure. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention today, folks.